Shoutouts to Harry Alisavakis. This tutorial is based on his Unity Waterfall tutorial. Be sure to check out his website, he's got a lot of great shader tutorials. So first I'm going to show how I made the textures for this. So I came into GIMP here and I just went to Filters, Render, Noise, and then Solid Noise here. Turn up the detail a bit. Then scale this to an amount that you want. Make sure you select Tileable here. And then you hit OK and you get that. Then for the difference or displacement texture I'm using, I did the same thing and then I added them to a group, and then I got these two colors over them, which I have set to subtract mode. So in here I'm subtracting the red and blue because I want it to be green, and then over here I subtract green and blue because I want it to be red. And then this group right here, I have it set to additive mode, so it adds the green to the red and I get this texture, and these are also set to be tileable. And then, so that way I can use the red and green values to displace things differently across the X and Y, or the red, using red and green. So now I'm going to come into Godot here, and let's add spatial, and let's, drag and drop in your textures. Then as a child of this, I'm going to add in a mesh instance, a cylinder mesh, and I'm going to set its height to 8. And just scroll, you'll zoom out here, hold Control and drag this up, and then Shift middle mouse button to pan around like this, and then just scroll middle mouse button to zoom, move around here. Let's see, go back, and then material, I'm going to add in a shader material, come in here, new shader, click that. And we're going to first start with the fields mostly. So shader type, it's spatial because it's 3D, and render mode, unshaded. I don't want to shade it. And then we're going to have a bunch of fields here. So this is the noise texture, this is the displacement texture, then the top and bottom light and dark textures. So I want it to fade. The light and dark will fade to the bottom basically. It'll be slightly different at the top and bottom. Then the displacement amount, so that's be used for like a ripple effect around it, how much it'll ripple. And then we're gonna have foam at the bottom, and this threshold will control how high the foam is. And then the speed will be how fast the waterfall falls down. And then we're just gonna add in a fragment method. So the fragment method is called once for every pixel on the screen. And then we're just going to start with, let's go back here, shader parameters. I'm going to drag and drop displacement texture onto here, and the cloud texture onto here. And then for the top light color, let's choose like that. And then I can just save this color here, go into here and choose the dark version of it. And then I can do the same for the bottom light color. I'll choose it less saturated maybe. And then this one will get a darker one there, and then that works. And then come back here. I believe if I don't change these, it won't not use these. It'll use these default values if I haven't set those to anything. So now I need to collect the noise. So I'm going to go sample the noise texture and just get the first channel because that's all I need since it's black and white. And then I'm just going to make a black and white color to apply to it. So that just basically applies the noise texture to this cylinder here. Then I want to stretch it on the Y. So I'm going to convert the UV into its separate components, X and Y, and divide the Y component by 3. And that'll stretch it out vertically. Next, I want to scroll down. Let me just save the scene here real quick as well. So if I want to scroll down on the Y, so there we go. I'll just subtract the Y component by time times whatever our speed is, and that'll make it scroll down basically. And then next, I want to apply banding. So right now I don't want it to be smooth in between this. I want it to be like several solid colors to make it a stylized effect. So you see that right there. That's what I want. So to do that, I take the noise, which is a value of 0 to 1, and I multiply it by 4, making a value of 0 to 4. Then I round it, so that converts it to either 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I divide that by 4 again, and that'll bring it back down to a value of 0 to 1, but it'll be in increments of 0.25, right? So 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and then 1. So that gives the nice banding effect. And you can play around with different kinds of rounding, like you use floor, and that'll give you more darker values, and then ceiling, which gives you lighter values. I prefer floor. I think it looks the best. Then next we want to add the ripple effect here using the displacement texture. So what we're going to do with this is we sample the displacement texture using our UV, and then we go diagonally across it. If you have a float here, and you have a 2D vector, you subtract a float from it, that float will be applied to both components. So subtract by time, divide by 8, slow it down a bit, and then get the red and green values of the displacement texture, which are what I have set in here. I don't have the blue value set at all. And then I take this displacement texture sample, basically, and I convert it from a value of 0 to 1 into a value of -1 to 1. Multiply by 2, subtract by 1. And then I scale that by the displacement amount. So right now it's set to 0.02. So that makes it a value of -0.02 to 0.02. And then I just take this displacement amount and I add it to our noise sample, basically. And that causes this ripple effect here, which looks pretty good. And then next, I want to apply the colors that we have set up. So I'm going to use this color selection here, and then we get the RGB values of the color. So we have our colors here, and they fade from top to bottom. So what this is, I get the top and bottom dark colors, and then I mix. This is basically LERP, if you're familiar with that, linear interpolate. And so I mix them based on the Y UV value. So if it's 1, we use the bottom, I think, and if it's 0, we use the top color, and if it's 0.5, then it's half and half. Do the same with the light colors here, and then I mix those light and dark colors based on the noise value, and then just set the color to that. And then we want to set the foam at the bottom. So to do that, we're going to set the color based on, we're going to mix white with the color, and we're going to have this step function which returns 0 or 1. So the first parameter here, if this is less than the second parameter, it returns 1, and if it's greater, then it returns 0. So something like, if I make the bottom foam threshold larger, I believe it'll rise up, and lower it'll go down, or something like that. I'm pretty iffy on the math on this. And then, so that's it for the waterfall. Now we want to add in some particle effects. I'm just going to name this waterfall here. Oops. And then we'll add in a particles effect here. And let's see, I want to add in draw passes. Pass 1, we'll add in a sphere. And then process material, new particles material. And then time, I'll set its lifetime to like 0.4 maybe. And I want to, let's say 16 will be the amount it creates. Then process material here, I'm going to get rid of gravity here. And then I want to set its emission shape. So I want it to appear around the base of the waterfall, but there isn't really like a cylinder emission shape. So I'm just going to use box. So you could probably use points, but I don't know how to set that up. You'd have to use a texture, I think. So I'm just going to have a box, and I need to rotate it because the initial velocity that I'm using that makes it go this way automatically points along the z-axis. So I want to make that up. So if I hold control and just rotate it, you hit E to move into rotate mode, then I can rotate it -90 so it's facing up. And then I can set this 0.2 for the z. That'll kind of flatten it, and I can set these to 1.5. We make them wider so they appear around the base there. And I'll turn this initial velocity down to like 0.2 or something, 0.3 maybe, so it rises really slow. Then I want to set the scale, so I'm going to use the scale curve here. I'll just drag this down to 0 and then move this over so it kind of pops into place and then stays large. And then set the initial scale to like maybe 0.6 or something. You can play around with it, see what you like. Then I want to set the color. This isn't going to show up. We're going to color ramp, new gradient texture, and then new gradient here. And I want it to be white, and then it goes to black. There you go. So you can't actually see that yet, and you won't actually see it. We're going to use that for something besides color. So if I go back to here, geometry instance, set the material to a shader material. We go in new shader here. Now we're going to set some values here. So unshaded and cull disabled. We don't want a back face cull. We want to be able to see the back of the polygons. And then dissolve texture. This will be used to dissolve each of them. And then the front color and then the back color. What should we paint? You know, the front or back of the polygon. Then we'll come in and again fragment here, and let's go back and set these values here. Front color to white, back color to like some blue, like that or something. And then the dissolve texture will just be our noise texture here. So come into here, and I can just set the albedo to the front color. And then I want to set the alpha basically. So right now, here's what this is. This is going to be a value of 0 to 1, and we're going to subtract it by, we're going to sample the texture, the dissolve texture here, with our UV, take the first channel, X component, subtract our value of 0 to 1 by that, and then if that value is less, using step, we can just check if the value is less than 0, if it's negative, then set alpha to 0, otherwise set it to 1. And then our alpha scissor here, we set it to 0.01, meaning anything with an alpha less than this will get discarded and not rendered. And so here I can show you this. If I set this value to 0, you can't see anything. If I set it to 0.5, you'll see they're half dissolved. So to get a value that goes from 1 to 0 for each of these individually, I can just take the color that we set and just take the R channel, which, you know, we set the color ramp so it goes from white to black. So the R channel is going to go from 1 to 0. So each one of them is individually animated now, which is pretty cool. This is pretty cool stuff. And next, I'm going to set up the waterfall, or the water surface. So mesh here, set a plane mesh. I'll call this water. And then I'm going to set the size to like 12 there. And then let's create a few more meshes, like cube, set the X to 16, I think. And I'll just W, drag this out to here. Control D to duplicate, and then just rotate out there. Set up these walls here because we want a foam effect to appear around the edge, right, of the water. And then I can also, let's see, add in a directional light, just make this look nicer. Let's see, move this out, rotate it a bit like that, and we can put in a camera. Move it to there maybe, move it up and rotate it down. I can click preview, see what it looks like. Looks pretty good. And then on there, I can set the environment background color to a custom color here, like, I don't know, some reddish color maybe. And then set the ambient color to something as well, like that. And if I preview this, you can see how it shows up like that. So a pretty good effect on the scene. I'll just move it so I don't see the top of the waterfall there. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Now let's set up the water itself. So if I go in material, new shader material here, new shader, set this up. So let's set up all our fields here. Spatial, unshaded, we have the main color of the water, the intersection of color of the water, so what color the foam around the edge will be, then the threshold of that, so how big the edge is, and then this will be displacement guide, will be our, or I'm going to call it displacement texture actually, and that'll be the texture we use for giving a ripple effect, and then displacement amount, that's how much it'll displace on the ripple, and then these are going to be used for linearization, which I'll explain in a second. So to get this effect, we're going to use kind of the easiest way to do it, and that's going to be, we can get the distance for each pixel here, we can get the distance from it to the camera, we can also, using the frag coordinates, and then we can also get the, let me recenter my screen just with F, and then, okay, so I can also get, let's say the camera's up here, we can get the distance to what's behind each pixel using the depth buffer, and we can take this distance and this distance to this pixel and see if the difference is less than a certain amount, and then paint that pixel to be like the foam if it's less than a certain amount, or we can make it the watercolor if it's greater. So the problem is those are not linear distances. Right, they're in like a logarithmic curve, so it's a value of 0 to 1, so this would be like, to this pixel would be 0, then this would be like 0.5, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, right? 1.0 would be infinity. And the reason it's in that curve like that is so you get more precision up close, because when you're this far away you can't see anything, right? So it doesn't even matter if there's not a lot of precision. You want it up close where you're going to see it. So we have to convert this, so if I get back to it, we have to convert the distance values to be linear, and so we're going to use this function I just pulled from Stack Overflow. We just take the depth value, make it a value of -1 to 1, and then we do some stuff here to linearize it. I don't know what it does. So we use, I believe, this near and far value, just determine this will be 1.0, and this would be 0.0, basically, the distances for those. So now that I have a linear function, I can go into our fragment, and let's start with setting the distance stuff up. So we're gonna get using a screen UV, we're gonna sample from the depth texture, which is what is the distance to everything on the screen, but not what we're currently rendering. And we just get the X channel. Since it's black and white, it doesn't matter which one we use. That'll give us our depth, and we linearize it. Then we do the same thing for the frag coordinate, so Z is our depth here, distance to that pixel, linearize that. Then we take the difference, and then if I set that to a black and white color for that, you can see how right on the edges it kind of is black and gray, and then it turns into white, right? So we can convert that into the colors we want. And to do that, we're just going to set up, we're going to mix the colors together. So let me set the colors actually real quick. Shader param, main color will be, I don't know, some kind of blue like that. And then the intersection color will be white. And we'll set our displacement texture real quick here. So if we come here, we're just mixing the main color and the intersection color by a value of 0 or 1. We use step, choose which color to use, and so we just check if our distance is basically greater than the threshold, right? So if I go in here, now you can see how it creates this outline around it, which is what we wanted, right? And now if I change this threshold, you can see it gets bigger or smaller, right? Now I want to add some ripple effect to it. So to do that, I'm going to sample the displacement texture we had. And so, what did I forget here? Oh, displacement texture, my bad. And so that gives us this. So we sample the displacement texture and we offset it by our time. Offset the UV by the time, right? So we're sampling different stuff as time goes on. Get the red and green channels, right? And then we scale it to whatever this is, negative to positive of it, 0.6, negative 0.6 to positive 0.6. And then we add that to our difference, right? And so that'll affect what value we're choosing and kind of ripple it around like that. So if I choose the camera here, preview, you can see how it looks. It looks pretty good. I mean, we're done here. You can see the limitation of using this for sort of the edge here, though, is that when you go up to the side, you can't actually see it anymore. So it's not perfect, but it works good enough for most uses. And then one other thing, you can lower this down so that it also gets some of that ripple effect. See, so it'll kind of appear underwater now. And then finally just preview, and that looks pretty good. You can mess around with it as you want to, make it look nicer.